Good afternoon, everyone. It is my great privilege to introduce our next speaker, the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Mr. Russell Vought. Russell Vought joined the Office of Management and Budget when President Trump took office. Vought previously served as Deputy Director and Acting Director prior to his confirmation as Director of OMB in July 2020. In his role, he is responsible for overseeing the implementation of the President's policy, management, and regulatory agendas across the executive branch. Prior to serving in the Trump administration, Director Vought spent over 20 years working in Washington, D.C. with grassroots and public policy organizations. Before joining the administration, he worked for 7 years as Vice President of Heritage Action for America. And prior to this, he worked on Capitol Hill, serving as the Policy Director for the House Republican Conference under then-Chairman Mike Pence, and as the Executive Director of the Republican Study Committee, and a Legislative Assistant for U.S. Senator Phil Gramm. Director Vought graduated with a BA from Wheaton College in 1998 and a JD from the George Washington University Law School in 2004. He lives in Virginia with his wife and 2 daughters. Please join me in welcoming Director Vought.
Thank you, everybody. It's good to be here with you. Lindsay's not supposed to mention the law degree. I don't like to mention that. I'm honored to be here with you and speak on where we are in terms of our efforts against the administrative state. The challenge before the Trump administration has been historic. When the President Trump was reelected, America was not just facing 1 or 2 existential issues. We faced many existential issues: the border, crime, transgender insanity in our community, climate alarmism. And our ability to address each of these existential issues hinged on a bureaucracy that was 100 years in the making. Some would call it a deep state. Some would call it the administrative state. I would call it a woke and weaponized administrative state because of the different characteristics and aspects of it. This administrative state is a threat to self-government itself because it reserves for itself the ability to control a presidential agenda, deciding success or failure on every issue. Our Constitution creates a strong presidency, ready to defend our citizens against all enemies, foreign and domestic. As Hamilton put it, energy in the executive is a leading characteristic in the definition of good government. Not only is it essential to the production of the community against foreign attacks, it is necessary to protect against those irregular and high-handed combinations which sometimes interrupt the ordinary course of justice, to the security of liberty, against the enterprises and assaults of ambition, of faction, and of anarchy. All of our greatest presidents have had one thing in common. They vigorously used the president's executive power and energetically defended the presidency from encroachments. Restoring the power of the presidency is a necessary condition to taking back the country from the administrative state. The unconstitutional fetters placed on the presidency have been enacted to ensure that a uniparty administrative state can continue calling the shots regardless of the people's choice in elections. And President Trump's vigorous use of his constitutional executive power is absolutely vital to breaking the domination of a D.C. elite and returning power to the people. President Trump acted rapidly to strike at one of the main pillars of the administrative state, agency independence from the president. President Trump has put an end to the concept of independent agencies. The Constitution vests all executive power in the president, who is in turn elected by and held accountable to the people. However, the progressive movement has always viewed this democratic accountability as a flaw, not a feature in the Constitution. In the early 1900s, the progressives sought to remedy this supposed flaw, not through pursuing a constitutional amendment, but rather by transferring massive amounts of executive power from the president and his appointees to an unelected, unaccountable bureaucracy. This progressive scheme involved 2 primary aspects. First, the progressive created so-called independent agencies. Congress created these agencies with multi-member boards with predetermined partisan balances. They also insulated the board members from removal from the president. These agencies were a complete novelty in our constitutional republic when it was first instituted. But over time, they became an accepted and entrenched part of the institutional landscape. These are well-known and immensely powerful agencies, the SEC, FCC, FTC, just to name a few. Yet the American people have been unable to control them. Instead, Congress's insulation from popular accountability for these agencies transferred their allegiance from the American people to their masters on congressional authorizing and appropriations committees and left-wing special interest groups. In their case, elections did not have consequences, and this is antithetical to our Constitution and to the very concept of democracy and republicanism. Second, the progressives insulated the federal bureaucracy from any form of political accountability. To do so, they used concerns about the so-called spoils system as a pretext to sever the vast majority of the executive branch from a direct chain of control from the president. Under the banner of expertise and good government, the progressives created a bloated bureaucracy answerable to no one, and as a result, incredibly incompetent and lumbering. Not only is this creation unaccountable, it is incapable of executing the basic functions of an efficient organization. There is a reason this sort of arrangement would never be tolerated in the private sector. These changes represented nothing less than a fundamental transformation of our system of government. While progressives proclaimed that their new form of government would provide technical expertise to the American people, what really was happening was the institutionalization of progressive politics permanently into our government. It's no coincidence that the bureaucracy has become a one-way ratchet for progressive social, economic, and environmental policies since this radical transformation. No matter how hard you try to take the bureaucrat out of politics, you cannot take the politics out of a bureaucrat. Rebecca Slaughter, the FTC commissioner who is challenging her termination by President Trump, epitomizes this point. Despite strident claims about the president's exercise of his removal authority undermining the FTC's quote-unquote technical expertise, no one could seriously claim that Rebecca Slaughter is an impartial technical expert. Rather, she was Chuck Schumer's chief counsel for years and boasts on her official webpage of her push for a progressive vision. Remembering that when you hear the cries from the left over the president undermining agency expertise. For a century, presidents of both parties have tolerated and operated within this absurd system. It took Donald Trump to finally say no more. Picking up where he left off in his prior term, the administration has fundamentally rejected the premise undergirding this project, the independence of the government from democratic accountability. Within weeks of assuming office, President Trump issued Executive Order 14215, which places formerly independent agencies under the president's control. Pursuant to this EO, no formerly independent agency can issue a regulation without review from the White House and other agencies overseen by OMB. This arrangement has been in place for non-independent agencies for decades. It's common sense, it's good government to immediately extend it to all so-called independents. A decision of the FCC can have a great impact on the equities of the DOW. Financial regulation requires careful coordination from a variety of regulators, some independent formally and some not, like Treasury. And all of this activity must conform to the policies of the president, who's actually elected by the overwhelming majority of the American people. This reform has been incredibly successful. OMB has worked hand in hand with President Trump's excellent picks to lead these agencies to ensure that their regulations are thoroughly vetted and vetted by the EOP and other agencies. Notably, this process has not slowed at all the historic pace of President Trump's deregulation. Instead, it has produced better regulations and ensures that the administration is implementing the president's policies in a coherent, whole-of-government manner. Thanks to these efforts, President Trump's administration is finally truly speaking with one voice. The president has also fired radical left-wing members of these former independent agencies. As the Supreme Court has held, removal is the president's ultimate tool to implement the founders' vision of a unitary executive. In the past, presidents of both parties have shied away from using this authority out of deference to a deeply flawed court opinions blessing Congress's attempts to shield executive officers from presidential control and removal. But President Trump, in the best traditions of our greatest presidents, recognizes that removal was essential to the supervision and control of the executive branch and has not shied away from using this authority to ensure that all agencies are acting in the best interest of the American citizens. For example, President Trump fired members of the National Labor Relations Board and the Merit System Protection Board. Despite howls of lawlessness from the left, the Supreme Court upheld these firings. The President also fired members of the FTC and the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the court again granted stays of lower court opinions attempting to reinstate them. We fully expect for the Supreme Court to soon hold once and for all that the President can fire members of so-called independent agencies. The administration is also moving to restore accountability to the vast bureaucracy. It is doing so through several means, one of which is it's called Schedule Policy Career Regulation. You might remember this as Schedule F in the last administration. Despite left-wing slanders, the classification of Schedule Policy Career is not a tool to arbitrarily fire federal workers. What this regulation will do is to ensure that the President and his policy officials can actually rely on the career federal workers in jobs that are part of the policy process to implement the President's agenda in an efficient and lawful manner. The American people have a right to expect professionalism, efficiency, and faithfulness from the federal workforce that they pay for. President Trump has achieved in just 1 year a fundamental restoration of our executive branch to the unitary structure envisioned by the founders and implemented by our greatest presidents. The progressive assault and fragmentation of the executive was nothing less than an assault on democratic ability, the structure of our Constitution, and the very concept of statesmanship itself. Decisions on great matters of state cannot be made through a rarefied technocratic process. The statesman must make the decisions, always conscious of their effects on other parts of government, the economy, society, foreign affairs, and politics. As President Jefferson observed in his first inaugural, it is only the president who commands a view of the whole ground. Attempting to make each decision in isolation through the prism of technocratic expertise leads to ruin, as the disastrous progressive social experiments have demonstrated, culminating in a truly headless executive branch in the Biden administration. That administration was, in fact, and I would encourage you to think about this, the progressive dream. A figurehead president and bureaucrats advancing a radical progressive agenda under the guise of technical expertise. By reestablishing the unity of the executive branch, President Trump has restored the unmatched capacity for statesmanship that the founders endowed in the president's office. OMB also is tasked by the executive order with coordinating and implementing the president's deregulatory agenda and ensuring that agencies are implementing that agenda. These DC interests have long hated this coordinated OMB review overseen by the White House, precisely because it places the president at the center in charge of executive branch policymaking. In President Trump's first term in office, he achieved deregulation that had never been seen before, not even close. In January 2017, President Trump tasked his administration with 2 deregulatory initiatives for every one, and not imposing any net cost on the economy. At this time, this was thought to be impossible. Not only did we hit 2 for 1 in the first administration, we achieved nearly 6 to 1. These were historic levels of deregulation at the time. In this administration, the president ran on and asked us to aim even higher than our historic gains in the first term. The president instructed us to achieve 10 deregulatory actions for every 1 regulatory. In our first year, we far exceeded even this ambitious goal, achieving a ratio of 129 to deregulatory to regulatory items. I still remember the call when we said we were going to go with a 10 for 1. I thought it's going to be hard, but we'll get it done. This has resulted in $212 billion in regulatory costs to the economy. Again, the greatest deregulatory savings in history. And that is just the beginning. This year, we are on pace to significantly surpass last year's cost savings. Deregulatory savings will be, for the first time in American history, over $1 trillion. The EPA's rescission of the lawless Obama-Biden endangerment finding alone is projected to save $1.4 trillion, and that's final. Think of the speed in which that rule was finalized already. OMB is focused not only on these numbers, but on ensuring that agencies are implementing good policy priorities as fast as possible. OMB is working closely with the EPA in Interior, Transportation, and Energy to unleash a golden age of American energy dominance to completely reverse the Obama-Biden assault on American energy production. The endangerment finding is just one instance of an all-of-government blitz to deregulate and encourage American energy production. For example, we are working closely with Interior on regulatory reforms that will give them the speed and flexibility to approve critical mineral licenses without needless delay. We've also fought hard to end California's war on gas-powered cars and trucks. The administration worked closely with Congress to end California's disastrous nationwide electric vehicle mandates through the Congressional Review Act. We are actively monitoring and fighting California's attempt to circumvent this decision and seeking to put an end to their attempt to impose nationwide mandates once and for all. This is just a sampling of our work in the deregulation space. Federal spending is another area in which President Trump has restored sanity to the federal government. The Biden administration was funding things that are truly astounding and unconscionable to the American people. He sent foreign aid funds for indigenous blanket marketing in Mexico, sustainable alpaca farming, a tea factory in Uganda. He spent funds on studying how racialized sexual discrimination impacts gay men of color, how Buddhism creates HIV stigma in Thailand, intersectional stigma felt by transgender women in sub-Saharan Africa, and racial and ethnic disparities in back pain therapies. This does not even begin to scratch the surface. President Trump refused to be passive in the face of this absurd Biden spending. Presidents have long refused to view themselves as mindless check writers. President Jefferson impounded funds for gunboats on the Mississippi River to avoid provoking France during secret negotiations over access to New Orleans and the purchase of the Louisiana Territory. President Grant impounded funds, including those in mandatorily worded appropriations for works of purely private or local interest, and made clear that during his term of office, no public money shall be expended upon special interest projects. Similar examples abound throughout U.S. history, from the minute, like President Madison's impoundment to funds for gunboat crews to save money, to the significant, such as President Johnson's impoundment of highway funds. Despite this robust bipartisan history of presidential initiative in spending, Congress enacted the Impoundment Control Act in 1974, which purports to prohibit the president from impounding funds, except in limited circumstances. Despite the constitutional shortcomings of the ICA, this administration has, for now, chosen to work within the confines of this law. Over the summer, President Trump sent a $9 billion rescissions package to Congress. This package, enacted by Congress for the first time since 1992, cut over $1 billion for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and $8 billion in the types of foreign aid funding that I just described. Demonstrating the importance of the federal funding to the D.C. left-wing complex, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting then had to vote to dissolve itself as a result of that package. After the success of this first rescissions package, which was not easy to get done, required much work in the House and the Senate, President Trump sent a second in August, which led to the first pocket rescissions in decades, and it is fully authorized by the Impoundment Control Act. This pocket rescissions ensured that nearly $5 billion in foreign aid dollars was not sent to actors who are not aligned with the national interest. It did not receive a vote from Congress. This was affirmed all the way to the Supreme Court, and also established the even more important principle that these types of funding disputes have to be worked out in the hurly-burly of politics between a president and a Congress, not lawsuits by left-wing NGOs and radical left-wing district judges. OMB, working closely with agencies, has also been conducting robust programmatic reviews to ensure that federal funds are being spent in a manner that is aligned with the President's policies. OMB is leading the charge to ensure that funds are not spent on unlawful and radical programs. It's also working closely with the Fraud Task Force to ensure that federal funds are not being diverted from deserving American citizens to fake daycare centers, illegal aliens, green new scam, kickback schemes, and countless other anti-American rackets. The president is not merely a check writer. He is the only man elected by the entire country, and he is vested with robust executive powers. It is his sacred duty to our citizens to ensure that their money is being spent for their welfare, not the welfare of well-heeled NGOs, illegal aliens, and certainly not fraudsters. When President Trump took office, he inherited a government in crisis thanks to the absentee presidency of Joe Biden. But it's important to know he also took on nearly 100 years of unconstitutional bureaucratic constraints and overreach designed literally to thwart democracy. Within a year, President Trump has vigorously employed the powers of the presidency to meet this crisis. He has returned power to the American people, unleashed energy dominance, achieved historic deregulation, ended, and I really believe this, decades of fiscal futility. We are at the beginning of being able to turn the corner. And he has made our great nation respected again on the world stage. As he would say, America is back. Our work is just getting started. Our work is just getting started, and it's my distinct honor to assist the President in the establishment of what we hope to be America's golden age. Thank you, and have a great weekend.
Please keep your seats. We're going to proceed with our program. In a moment. While we wait, just a few closing announcements. First, we want to thank again Michael and the RNLA team for putting on an incredible policy conference. When Lee Goodman called to ask me to chair this conference, he told me I wouldn't have to do anything, that Michael and the staff would do it all, and he was right about that. Michael, thank you, and thanks to the team. I also want to thank the Bob Horn Fund for Law Students volunteers who are here today helping facilitate logistics here at the conference. It was mentioned earlier today, and it's worth mentioning again, that donations can be made to the fund to keep Bob's vision alive and to encourage the next generation of lawyers. Any RNLA staff member can provide you more information on how to donate. Immediately after the final plenary session, we will have a conference reception. It is in the First Amendment Lounge down the hall. This reception is off the record and closed to the press. On your way out, please turn in your CLE attendance forms. And if you are receiving credit for Virginia, Oklahoma, New York, or New Jersey, please be sure to sign the sign-out sheet. Lastly, when you do leave the ballroom, please take your personal items. You will not be able to re-access the ballroom after the reception is over. For our final plenary session of the day, the Acting Attorney General It is my pleasure to welcome back to the stage the RNLA co-chair, the vice chair of the Missouri Republican Party, Jennifer Bukowski, to present the Ed Meese Award.
Good afternoon and hello again. We've had a great day so far, haven't we, RNLA? I know the Trump administration and Americans across the country are celebrating the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence all year long, and I think we've had a wonderful time doing just that today. We continue that celebration now by presenting our 2026 Edwin Meese III Award to Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. Edwin Meese III was Ronald Reagan's close advisor and served as U.S. Attorney General from 1985 to 1988. He was one of the most important legal conservatives of the Reagan era and helped champion the ideas that became central to our modern conservative legal movement: originalism, judicial restraint, and skepticism of expansive federal power. The RNLA Honorable Edwin Meese III Award is bestowed every year upon an individual who has upheld the rule of law in the face of adverse political challenges. During Meese's bruising confirmation fight, Democrats accused him of having a lack of ethical sensitivity and a blindness to abusive position. My, how far we've come since the 80s. Todd, you're in very good company. Todd Blanche chose to represent Donald J. Trump during a time when simply agreeing to defend the left's most hated man could get you pilloried, professionally blacklisted, and even personally targeted. Law firms refused to employ lawyers who had signed on to defend Donald Trump in civil or criminal cases, no matter how absurd or abusive those cases were. Rogue judges tried to silence Trump from even speaking in his own defense, and states invented creative and blatantly unconstitutional theories to keep him off the ballot so that Americans would not even have the chance to vote for him. But Todd Blanche stood firm. He left his prestigious New York law firm partnership. He took on President Trump's cases, and he helped ensure that the American people, not prosecutors, judges, or political operatives, would decide the 2024 election. At least 77 Americans are grateful that Todd had the courage and fortitude to withstand that pressure. And now, as acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche continues to serve both President Trump and the country, leading the Department of Justice at this critical moment for the rule of law. General Blanche, we are honored to present you with this award, and we look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Good afternoon. I think I'm the last speaker before happy hour, so there's always irrational pressure on me. But thank you for that introduction. I really appreciate it. I don't know if there's others in the room who had the real genuine honor of representing President Trump. But there's one man that I recognized when I came in who had the beauty of this guy is that when I represented President Trump in the Manhattan case, and then the president asked me to help represent him in the case brought in Florida, and then, you know, because two's not enough, they indicted him in D.C., and the president, who I love, just kept on saying, you know, Todd, you can do that one too. And to those of us who are litigators in the room, you can imagine how that went. And so I was introduced to a lawyer in Midtown Manhattan who, like me, was a former prosecutor. And unlike me, he was a phenomenal criminal defense attorney for many, many years. And he was pitched at me as a DC guy who could help out. Admittedly, I probably would have taken anybody at the time. But I got lucky because I honestly never had to speak in court in front of Judge Chutkan here in the city, because every time we had a conference, this man was not only prepared and eloquent and pushed back and stayed on message and really put the president's and actually the country's interests first in everything he said, but he also made me look good, which was nice. So John Lauro, it's great to see you, and I'm really glad that you're here, so thank you. If you guys are writing history books, one thing that people don't seem to ever focus on, which I think is, who in this room are litigators, by the way? A lot. Okay, perfect. Okay, extraordinarily, and what people do not talk about, I feel like the president right now because I'm going completely off script. John and I and the rest of our team, Emil, my team, his team, did something extraordinary that the media, I'm not sure, has reported on a single time, which is that in everything that happened in D.C., in the prosecution against President Trump in D.C., we managed to, so that the president never once had to appear in front of Judge Chutkan. Did anybody know that? Thank you. That's what I'm asking for. A little recognition. Come on. Like, think of what kind of a rock star lawyer, and again, in this, I'm not speaking about myself, I'm speaking about John. We managed to convince the judge at every single pretrial conference hearing when she wanted to yell at us, when she was going to rule against us on a completely unconstitutional gag order. We were like, hey, is it okay if he misses this one? And every time we got that. So incredibly, one of the amazing facts about the work that we were able to do for President Trump is he never even had to show up. He had to show up for the arraignment, but it was done in front of a magistrate judge. And so in front of Judge Chutkan, he was never inside that courtroom, which was, anyway, I'm just looking for a little credit. So thank you. Keeping in mind a cold drink is next for you guys. Thank you very much for letting me spend a few minutes with you here this afternoon, and to be recognized with the Edwin Meese Third Award is very humbling for me, and I'm grateful. Beyond John Lauro, who's here, I want to acknowledge the rest of you in this room. It represents the best Republican lawyers from every corner of the country. And my team and I were trying to think of a right way to describe what it's like being a Republican lawyer in this city. And I'm sure some of you could come up with better quips, but where we landed was that it's a little bit like wearing a Cowboys jersey in Philly. You're either brave or confused, but you're going to get heckled. And I think that's probably right. We're a group of people who have chosen a demanding profession. It's a profession that takes effort, it takes resolve, it takes backbone. It takes a lot of late nights and a lot of early mornings, but it also is extraordinarily rewarding. So I don't think that it's said enough, because lawyers are are often just a pretty good, funny punchline of a joke. But we also are doing great work, and so my first comment is to thank you for being part of a profession that remains noble and remains important. And I think you should look yourself in the mirror and say, yeah, that's right. And I agree with that. I know that leaders who have received this reward before me, like Senator Graham, public service like Michael Chertoff and John Ashcroft, lawyers like Ted Olson, Don McGahn, C. Boyden Gray, but really Ed Meese himself. Listen, I've talked about him a lot the past year and a half, and to be included on this list is fulfilling, and it's a good reminder that the law at its at its best, depends on people who are willing to stand up, to take responsibility and accept the consequences that come with the responsibility that you accept and the fact that you stood up. And Ed Meese certainly understood that as well as any one of us. He faced, and this is where he feels like me a little bit, he faced criticism when he became the Attorney General and working in the administration for President Reagan because he had been his personal advisor, his close advisor and his personal lawyer. Obviously, he was questioned about independence. He was questioned about judgment, about how he could possibly carry out this role, given his past. And, you know, that sounds like what they say about me on CNN every night. It sounds like what every single Democrat has said about me, you know, every time they bring up my name. But really, anyone who steps into public service, especially for an administration in Washington, D.C. or around the country, is going to be scrutinized. That's part of the job, and by the way, it should be part of the job. The Department of Justice in particular, especially today, carries a unique responsibility, and it should be held to a very high standard by every single American. And so one thing that I hope folks realize is that when there's criticism directed at the Department of Justice or at the leaders of the Department of Justice, whether it's from Republicans, Democrats, lawyers, politicians, that should not be greeted or accepted with frustration or annoyance by leadership. It should be welcome because we are held to a high standard. And there's nothing wrong with good faith disagreement. Reflexive criticism is something that happens. But what matters ultimately is not where you come from, not who you used to represent or what you used to do. What matters is how you carry out the responsibilities entrusted to you. And that's the standard that Ed Meese applied, and it's why he is, as was just said, is recognized as the great lawyer, the great American, the great patriot that he certainly was and remains. And I certainly hope that that's part of my story when it's written somewhere other than the New York Times. It is true that when I made the decision to represent President Trump a couple years ago, it did put me in the public eye in a different way than what had happened in the past. It wasn't welcomed. I described myself, and this is a long story, so don't jump to conclusions, as being somewhat similar to Dick Cheney, because what happened is that I was representing one of the president's advisors, and I was one of the only New York lawyers. And when we learned that Alvin Bragg was kicking the tires and thinking about indicting the president, I was told, well, you got to help us find a lawyer for the president in New York. And so I tried. I called all my colleagues and friends, all my Republican colleagues and friends, all my rock star former prosecutor colleagues and friends who worked at small firms, big firms, had their own shops. And to a person, they all said no. And not necessarily no because they didn't want to do it. No, because of any number of reasons, right? And the same reasons that we've heard for many years, whether it's a risk the firm wasn't willing to take, whether it's some other artificial justification for not wanting to represent the former president of the United States of America. And so at the end of the day, much like Vice President Cheney, when he was trying to find a vice president for President Bush, I said, well, I can't find anybody. What do you want me to do? Let me show you my resume. And so that's kind of how a sad reflection, although I'm really happy it happened, but a sad reflection of the state of the New York bar at the time. Unfortunately, it's not just New York. I've said, and I'm in therapy right now, but I've said that I get it, right? Like I get why the firm did that, but I really don't. And I don't think anybody should understand why that is the situation. I mean, the very essence of the work that we do, no matter what kind of lawyer you are, whether you're, it doesn't matter whether you're representing, whether you're doing mergers and acquisitions or bankruptcy or white-collar litigation or criminal defense work, it doesn't matter. The whole point of being a lawyer is that you take on tough cases and you take on tough clients, and you take on clients that are not popular. You take on clients that maybe you personally wouldn't necessarily want to spend the night, having dinner with them. But that's not really, that's actually the point of our profession, right? That's the point of what we do. It's not something and what happened, unfortunately, over the last several years is it became the point. And it became an issue, a topic. My firm set up some sort of I don't know what they really called it. I call it the moral committee. And 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and an independent who made sure to vote against us every time. This isn't open to the press, is it? I'm kidding. I know you guys are here. It's okay. So look, I think that it's a reminder that our profession, for all of its traditions, it still depends on individual lawyers making independent judgments, taking on difficult cases, representing clients when it's not easy, and when it may come with professional or personal cost. And that's not something new. And like I said a minute ago, it's what being a lawyer really means. I think most of us have learned at some point early in our careers, hopefully, that the system only works if people are willing to stand in that role, to represent, to be present, to advocate, and to take positions that others may disagree with. And we're seeing this growing pattern, which many have called lawfare, and I think it's a fair word to describe it, directed not just at clients or causes, but now at us, at lawyers. And whether it's what I just talked about, pressuring firms into not taking clients or firing lawyers that want to take certain clients or controversial matters, stigmatizing lawyers because of their political beliefs, it's a dangerous road. And it's a dangerous road no matter what side of the aisle you're on, because the legal system depends on lawyers being willing to represent clients without fear of that happening, without fear that their livelihood will be taken from them for doing so. And it depends on firms, on law firms, on institutions and clients, institutional clients especially, making decisions based on professional judgment, not outside pressure. And it also depends on a culture, I think, that represents that respects the difference and the distinction between advocacy and endorsement. And so when that distinction disappears or breaks down, the consequences are serious. And the last thing I'll say, and now it sounds like I'm at a funeral, which I'm not, is that I think you could joke that the last time that there were this many Republican lawyers in the room was at the last D.C. Bar Disciplinary Committee hearing. But it's actually not funny, for one, and it's actually not a joke. So, it fails. But just the idea of this country and also this city, okay? This city, Washington, D.C., discriminating against lawyers for their political beliefs or for the clients they choose to represent, it's unfair, it's un-American, and I want to say that we are 100% confronting it at the Department of Justice. We are 100%. We are 100% committed to applying the law evenly and ensuring that nobody is targeted for exercising their rights, whether to speak, associate, practice law, whatever their ideology. But that's why organizations like you all, that's why this organization matters, because you bring together lawyers who engage not just in the work, which is important, but in the broader conversation about law and the country's direction. And that takes steady, everyday courage, especially today, showing up, speaking out, and sometimes, unfortunately, not today, thank God, but sometimes standing alone. The mission, I believe, is straightforward: enforcing the law, pursuing cases, and making sure that wrongdoing is addressed. That's the department's mission. It should be the mission in every administration. It's certainly our mission. And that means focusing on the threats that most directly impact the safety and security of us, of the American people. It means prioritizing violent crime, which we're doing, dismantling the organizations that drive it, which we're doing. It means taking aggressive action against transnational criminal groups, which we're doing every day. We're getting weapons away from the people who shouldn't have them, but we're doing everything we can to protect the right of every American who's allowed to have them, to have their weapons. And next week, I heard that the White House counsel, one of my good friends, stole my thunder, which is also his right. But as soon as next week, you're gonna learn when it comes to the Second Amendment and our fierce protection of it, that we're overhauling the gun regulations, because in this president's administration, the Second Amendment rights that we have are sacred, and they're not a second-class right, as the Supreme Court said many time ago, but it's true. And we had, it took a while, it's April, but we have a guy who I love, who's a scholar. He clerked for Justice Thomas, and he is, I believe, one of the only scholars, he's a law professor who specializes in Second Amendment advocacy for our side. And he's the general counsel of serving as the general counsel of ATF, and he's spent a year, not quite a year, but 8 months getting it right, or trying to get it right, and the results and the fruits of that labor are going to be coming out next week. It also means when we talk about our mission, it means reinforcing public safety by supporting law enforcement. Again, something that shouldn't have to be said, but for many years it wasn't happening, and in this country today it's still not happening enough, but it's something that we're doing and that we're making sure happens. We're protecting the free exercise of religion. Again, something that shouldn't have to be said by the leadership of the Department of Justice, but it does, given what happened during the last administration. It means we're maintaining a clear commitment to constitutional rights, including those that are sometimes debated, but foundational. I want to say something else about what we're doing. There are moments when the department has to take on issues that are difficult, complex, controversial, and those are the moments when judgment and integrity matters most. It's when it's important to return to our first principles, the Constitution, and then the statutes, and then the role of the department within our system of government. And I don't think folks in this room need a lecture on that, so I won't lecture you on that. You live it every day. But I will say this: the strength of our system doesn't just come from any one office or any one person. It comes from the accumulation of decisions made by thousands of lawyers across the country, federal, state, and private, who take their responsibilities as members of their bar seriously, and it includes all of you. So whether you're in private practice or government service or somewhere in between, by the way, if you're in private practice and you want to come to government service, or somewhere in between, you're part of that system, okay? You're part of the process that gives meaning to the phrase that we say every day, the rule of law, and that's important. So, two things. First, again, thank you. Thank you for the work that you all do, often without recognition. Thank you for staying engaged, for staying involved, and for speaking up. Thank you for being part of a profession that still, at its core, I believe, values independence and judgment. And second, and more importantly, or as importantly, don't underestimate the role that you all play. Every brief you file, every client you represent, every argument you make, those are the building blocks of our judicial system. They shape outcomes, they shape expectations, and over time, they shape our country. And that's not an abstract idea, it's something real, and it's something that depends on people like all of you. I am honored to receive this award. I mean that. especially one that bears Ed Meese's name. Every time a reporter says, for the first time in history, a former lawyer of the president, I mean, that is not true. And I'm not even talking about Bobby Kennedy, who was the brother of the president, but I'm sorry, let's just stick to the facts. Yeah, but in all seriousness, thank you guys so much. It's great to be in the company, in this city, in the company of folks that are doing the work that you do every day in courtrooms, in your law firms, but also in your communities as well. And so have a great evening, and thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Please keep your seats and places until General Blanche departs. Okay, this concludes the 2026 Policy Conference. Thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you at the reception. Please turn in your CLE form.